Record. We are recording.
Wonderful. So, what did I miss? You guys got on before I did.
Well, we were just talking about kind of what we were through researching, trying to prepare for this assignment, what we found. I kind of related, when I first saw this assignment, I first looked at it, the first thing that popped in my mind was trustworthiness. So trying to kind of establish that trustworthiness of the readers, making sure that it's credible information. But through reading, I felt like it was kind of associated, but not. So I didn't know what you guys felt about that.
Hold on, let me stop you for 1 second. I want to make sure that I'm prepared for the right thing here. This is the ethical discussion?
Right.
Okay. And our particular topic has to do with being assigned as a reviewer, for a blind reviewer for something that we can tell who the person is?
Right.
Okay. So I guess I took a different route with this and thought that this was more kind of our opinion based on and just discussing what the ramifications would be. Should we decide to do this review? Should we not decide to do this review? Why or why not? And what would, so I guess I didn't do as much prior research, if you will, specific to some of the things that we discussed in class. To me, when we talk about trustworthiness, that has more to do with original research and trying to verify data that, or validity of data, externally for a paper or for a presentation. So I was thinking more along just a general conversation that has to do with, what would happen if we said, sure, we'll just do the review and not tell anyone that we know who it is? Should we tell someone? And then really the second question is personally how each of us would handle the situation after the conversation.
Right. And I think one thing that I was thinking of is kind of comparing it to quantitative research too, and it almost being the equivalent. I guess I was thinking blind study. What if we were trying to do a blind study and almost the blindfold fell off, to say, the doctor could figure out which patients, because let's say the patients noticed a difference in the pill or something like that.
That's a good analogy.
Have to make other people aware of it, especially because it doesn't sound like it would be necessarily our project. So I would hate to be a part of something where the researcher themselves, we put a dent in their research to get our name on it too, or in some way or something. You know what I mean? Because I was trying to think this to benefit. How would it benefit me? What would cause me to accept the topic, which I would think would be to be somebody on whose name would go on the research because I would be a part of it. And what would be a negative thing would be to put a dent in the research or to make their research not as valid with those statements. But I guess I still have the option of, hey, I'm reviewing this, but I wouldn't be a blind reviewer. I would feel great about reviewing your topic still and being a part of it, but maybe taking off the blind name or giving that disclaimer. Because I would think,
just to clarify,
project. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I would say, just to clarify, this is not, I don't believe this is a situation in which we would be associated with the paper. This is, so let's say your project, you did a full study and you submitted it to the Athletic Training Education Journal for publication. Part of the peer review process would be the editor of that journal would then reach out to Danielle and say, we would like you to conduct a blind review as part of the peer review process and decide whether or not Megan's paper should be published. Now, they wouldn't use your name because it'd be blind review. And the ethical consideration is Danielle, because she's in this class with you, knows your project. And even though there's no identifying information being sent to her by the editor, she reads through it and she says, this is Megan's project. So the ethical consideration is, does Danielle refuse to review it because there's some inherent bias just because she knows who it is? So if she likes you, she might say, yes, publish it. If she doesn't like you, she might say, don't publish it. Right. So I think
we'll be a little bit more mature than that.
Yeah, right. I think we're supposed to debate whether or not we would accept the blind review, or would we make known to the editor that we know whose paper it is. Or would we just say, I don't want to be a reviewer for this, and list the reasons why, or not even list the reasons why. So I think the ethical consideration is, how would we handle that situation where we're asked to decide if someone's work should get published or not? in a blind fashion if we inherently know who that person is.
Right. Well, we're supposed to argue both sides, right?
Correct. Yeah. So we're supposed to look at all the different
avenues.
I was just listening to what Megan was saying. I want to make sure we're on the same page. I don't think it's involved with the research versus not involved with the research. It's more of the gatekeeper in the peer review process of deciding if someone's work would get published, which, we put a lot of work into the 10 weeks for this project. A full study, people put much more work into. And if we, the ethical dilemma is that we could be squashing or promoting someone's hard, work in a way that we shouldn't be if we're asked to truly be a blind reviewer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think maybe we should start with why should we do it?
Mm-hmm.
And then we can talk about why we wouldn't do it and look at all the different aspects. And then maybe end with question number 2. Each of us can just say, what would we actually do in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
That sound like it'd work?
Yeah, sounds great.
All right.
Do this.
So what are the reasons why we should accept this task that was assigned? Like, so what were potentially, why might we think about saying, yeah, sure, we'll do a blind review, even though it's not blind?
I think just for the mere fact that it would help get better information out to the masses, if you will. So improving patient outcomes, in this case, educational, if it was educational, improving athletic training education as a whole. So trying to be completely unbiased in the sense that for me, I think it would be to better the research.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
I guess my question would be, are there other people who are just as qualified to do a blind review of this article other than me? You know what I mean? Who would actually be blinded? Because maybe somebody's very, very good at being able to review the literature, and maybe not me, but somebody else feels like, hey, I am so good at reviewing the literature, I feel like I could take my bias out of this, even though I know who it is.
Sure. I think the challenge for me in that situation, I go back to some of the comments from the experts that did the videos a couple weeks ago that we watched for class, and them talking about some of the challenges they've had with the peer review process when submitting qualitative research, because there are not a lot of reviewers out there with experience in qualitative research. Right. So, I think one of the ethical dilemmas is, so you read through the paper, it's a really good paper. You can identify who wrote it, but it's supposed to be a blind review. And you think, well, if I turn this down, it may go to someone else that's not as qualified as myself after having completed this course to do the review. They might turn it down, meaning they would say this shouldn't get published. We might think it's a really good paper and will help inform the literature. And us saying, no, we can't review it would delay that process even further. So it would not get out to the masses more quickly. Right. I think one potential argument for why you might accept this task is exactly what Megan said, is that we may be able to, in our own way, say, well, we'll keep our bias out of it, even if we know who it is, because it's a really well done paper and it's worth being published.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one potential thought that I had when looking at this.
Right. I would agree.
I didn't think about the whole, maybe the other reviewers may have more of a focus on quantitative research. Maybe like many of us were before starting this class thinking, oh, well, qualitative research isn't as valid. No, I think we should put a quantitative research paper in that spot or something in the review.
Have either of you been a reviewer before for journals?
I have not.
So let me just kind of give you a rundown of how it happens and why this is a difficult ethical dilemma. Especially, I would imagine, I've not done qualitative work before, so I would imagine it's even longer. But when you submit the paper, usually the editor of the journal has to assign it to a reviewer. And the reviewers themselves are not always as responsive as they might want to be because they're busy and they have jobs and they have things like that. So sometimes the turnaround time for even getting in contact with a reviewer can be a week or two before someone says, yes, I will or I will not do this. And if the person, once they accept it, then they usually have a couple weeks to review the project and then come back with their feedback and whether or not it should or shouldn't be published. So you're talking about from the day you submit it, you could be waiting 4 weeks to 6 weeks before you ever get feedback from the reviewer as the person publishing it. So if you're the reviewer and you say, sure, I'll accept it, you get a due date of 3 weeks from now. If you're anything like me, you wait about 2.5 weeks before you start doing it. Right? And then you read the paper and you realize, oh, wow, this is due next week, but I have bias because I know who wrote this. Right now, I've already made them wait a month. And now I'm going to kick it back to the editor and say, I don't think I should do this. It could, if this is someone that's in their doctoral work or a junior faculty member that's potentially on a tenure track position, they need this, if it's published worthy, they need it published as soon as possible, or you're delaying their tenure and promotion. Right. So there's a lot of factors that could play into that process of why it may be in favor of trying to set your bias aside and reviewing the paper. So
in general, how many peer reviews are you looking for when you're sending this off?
So that's, in my experience, that's 100% based upon the journal and how the editor, I think in the papers that I've submitted, like with my thesis and whatnot, sure. I've usually reviews from 2 people. Okay. But, and some journals will allow the person that submits it to suggest who they think should review it, based upon if they know someone in the field that they feel is an expert, but usually the editor will select whoever they have for it. And I think it's 2 people. But I think that one of the ethical challenges for turning it down would be continually delaying the process for the person that, if it's a tenured faculty member that's on their 40th publication, it's probably not going to affect them as much if it's someone that just finished their PhD and potentially might lose their job if they have to get tenure to keep it and they're in the 2nd year, So I think those are some of the things that I thought about as to why you might consider doing it.
Okay.
Which factors you may know if you know the reviewer.
Exactly.
I mean, if you know them well enough to recognize their paper, you might actually know all of that stuff about them.
Which could be harder to not have bias.
Yeah. Definitely.
What else?
So the why not? We kind of covered that a little bit. I mean, I completely agree with what we've already talked about in the sense of why not. It really could affect the content. Your bias could affect the study and the validity of the study. So I feel like that's not good.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's also hard to be objective. I mean, if you know who the person is, I think in research, people tend to have a slant towards what the people that look into ACL issues, they might have a particular graph that they think is most appropriate, or they may have, particular research or rehab protocol that they think is the best protocol to follow. And those are just kind of internal biases that probably exist. I would imagine in the qualitative world, similar things might exist. So if you know who wrote the paper, you may know what internal bias they have, and if that's different than your own, right? So let's say this is a paper on ACL tears, and you think a double bundle graft is better than a single bundle graft, and I'm a single bundle graft person. It's going to be hard for me to review your paper knowing who you are, thinking about, well, if she would just understand, then we could get through this. So I think that's part of the challenge is regardless of how objective, we might want to be, can you really be whenever you know who it is?
Right.
Trustworthiness, or not, I know it doesn't have to do with trustworthiness, but how much you actually trust that person to, like those things that we talked about in class with, well, if I decide this or put it in this category, it may affect the whole result. So how much respect you have for that person may cause some bias too.
Yeah.
I think another thing to consider as far as why you might not do it is the journals themselves are only as strong as the rigor that it takes to get something published in it, right? So, a blog is a wonderful way for you to share information with a great amount of people, but you get to decide what you publish and what you don't.
Right.
So as far as the, scientific rigor that it might entail to publish on it, people don't look to blogs as the best resource for information. So if the reviewer themselves don't follow along with the guidelines of being asked to do a blind review and it not being a blind review, then, and no one may know this but themselves, but it could potentially hurt the stature of the journal itself, right? There's some asterisk, even if it's just for that one person, that is then attached to that particular journal because it didn't follow the processes by which the journal was founded on. And I'm sure it happens all the time, but something to think about.
Yeah.
What else? Other thoughts? Trying to read through this paper and make sure I'm not missing any questions.
Well, I mean, I feel like we're definitely hitting all the major points there.
Yeah.
I would think.
Well, if you want, we can move on to question 2 and just go around and, talk about how we would handle it individually and then, argue about it.
Mm-hmm.
That was supposed to be, there's a smile. That was supposed to be a joke.
You start. Go ahead.
Me? I don't know.
Why would you do this? What is your personal opinion?
So what I would probably do is, as soon as I recognized that I knew who the reviewer was, I would probably not immediately just turn down the offer to review it, but I would probably make the editor or whoever contacted me aware of the situation. And say that, I've read through the paper. I believe I know who the author is, and you've asked me to perform a blind review. Please advise on how you'd like me to proceed. Mm-hmm. If the editor responded and said, I don't care, I just want to get this done, then I would probably be a little bit more concerned about it than say, well, let's have a conversation about where your biases might be and then decide what the best course of action is. But I think ultimately, for me, I would follow the lead of whoever was overseeing the particular journal and, make my knowledge and bias aware to them and let them decide, because they were the ones that decided to throw it to me in the first place. So if they wanted me to continue to do it, then I'd be happy to do the review. But I guess it's kind of like a cop-out answer, but I'd let someone else decide. Personally, I would make it known, right? So I would decide not to do it until I was then told that they were still okay with that and would want me to do it.
Right.
But I don't think I would flat out just say no thanks. I would try to complete the review with it known that I knew who the author was, or at least suspected who the author was.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Come back and
say that again.
I didn't hear what Megan said.
I was going to say, maybe they'll say, oh, wait, that really wasn't the author.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, that was my thing. What I wrote down was how can you be 100% sure? It's probably the case that you do this and know this person. We do work in a very small world, so there's a very good chance that you do know this author. But unless you're flat out being told this is this person, I would do the same thing as you, Brian. Be like, I think it's this person. I might not be, correct on that, but if it is, I just want you to know that. And I wrote down the exact same thing. Have them decide, because them telling me go ahead and move forward makes me feel a little bit more comfortable. And I'll still try to be unbiased as much as I can, but having them aware of the situation would make me feel better than just being like, oh yeah, sure, no problem, moving on with my life, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing. Is there some way in the review process that you can make, I guess I don't really understand the review process that I would be taking on as a blind reviewer in a way. So if there's a way that I could review it and it just not be called blind, or that we could somehow get around that to where I can provide that feedback, like y'all are saying,
Sure.
but not necessarily call it blind, or some way where, like you said, the editor could make it okay. Like, okay, well, we go through this extra step during this process if we can't find a blind reviewer.
Yeah. In my experience, I've only ever reviewed for like 2 journals, so I would have to imagine that most of them are similar but have their own individual differences. Usually what occurs is you get the document without any identifying information on it as far as the author and where it was conducted. You read through it, and then there's a general form of, you can just do it freehand within like a Word document, but they ask certain categories that you review based upon, like, review the methods, review the statistics, review the results and whatnot. And those are all public to the author. So, you send those back to the editor forwards them to the author, and your name as a reviewer is usually not attached. But there's usually a form as well, or a space to include private notes to the editor. And those are supposed to be free for the reviewer to identify areas where there may be limitations in the review. So, for example, one that I've done in the past, I don't have a very strong statistics background, but the content of what the paper was in was something that I knew a lot about. So I could comment a lot on the introduction and the need for and the methodology of the study. I could comment a lot about the results, or I guess the discussion piece. I don't know if they ran the right statistics. I don't know. You know what I mean? So that was something where I didn't really comment a lot about to the author, but I put to the editor, just saying that, I'm, what am I, 10 years now removed from graduate school and now just currently learning statistics again in this program. So I don't really feel comfortable making comments about that. So there are ways in which you can have that communication directly to the editor, saying, I just make it known, here's my review. If you don't want to accept it, that's fine. I do believe I know who the author was. I understand if you go, a different direction with the review process. But I think before you took the time of completing the review, you would probably want to reach out to the person and the editor and have that conversation in the first place.
Right. I would agree.
What other options are there? So there's basically two options. You either review it and don't tell the editor, or you don't review it or go through the editor. Like, you either tell or you don't. There's no other options.
Yeah. I mean, you either do it and keep your mouth shut, or you make it known. I think there's three options, right? You do it and you keep your mouth shut. You make it known, and they continue. They still ask you to review it, or you just say no. You don't even have to explain why. Like, when you get asked to be a reviewer, you could just say no thanks, and not tell the reason why. Which you could also argue has some ethical implications as well, right? If you don't tell them why, you could just be busy or lazy or any of these other things, and not helping the research process, which I think is, from an ethical standpoint, far lower on the scale.
Yeah.
To just say no is probably not a big ethical dilemma. Just no thanks. I'll get you next time.
Yeah. There's going to be some ethical or unethical portion of all the options. I think it's just a matter of how comfortable do you feel as the reader, and how comfortable the author/editor feel about you being involved.
Yeah.
So it's going to be kind of weighing your pros and cons for any of them, I think. I think that's it.
Any other thoughts? Things that you can think about for or against why we would or wouldn't do this?
Well, you kind of brought up an interesting point earlier when you said that the author can make recommendations of who they would want to review. Did I understand you correctly?
Yeah, sometimes. I don't know. Again, some journals are different, but
that to me seems a little unethical for the author to decide who would review.
Well, and I've only done this a couple times.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
I could be
one more than me. I've never done.
It may be more so through identification of, like, if you're publishing a paper in a very kind of niche type field, and there's only a couple different people that are qualified to do that, sometimes you just help the process for the editor to identify someone.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't inherently mean that the person knows that you're requesting them, and it could still be a blind review. Meaning, like, as the reviewer, you could just say, it was made known to us that you're an expert in this area. Would you be available to review this paper? And you might not know who submitted it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I don't know how that process works exactly, because I've only ever submitted like two papers, my thesis and then one that we wrote for one of the courses, the EBP course last semester, or block or whatever it was last. So I don't know how that happens because I've never requested, I didn't have to request any particular reviewer when that happens. So
right. Okay.
But no, I agree with you.
Yeah. I just think you'd be setting it up. I mean, because like you said, small world, but there's a greater chance for someone to recognize your work or you because of you saying, hey, how about this person? Someone might have heard through the grapevine, or, they do know you one-on-one, or they've discussed with you, one night about something about your work. I just feel like it kind of sets it up for there to be an issue. So,
are not all of the blind, maybe? And in that situation, maybe it wouldn't necessarily have to be a blind study.
I'm sorry. Can you say that again? I didn't catch that.
I mean, would there be situations where it would be not a blind study or a blind review?
I'm sure that exists. Like, to take that to the nth degree, if there are only two people in the world that are doing research in a particular area and one of them submits a paper, the other one might review it.
Yeah, exactly.
I couldn't even come up with an example, but I'm sure somewhere in some small lab, in the middle of nowhere, someone's doing something that no one else is doing. So to try to find, an unbiased person that really doesn't know who that is, it could be difficult.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm certain that it happens, and I don't think, again, each journal is different. I don't think every journal necessarily has a standard of it having to be a blind review.
Right.
It could be different journals, and some journals don't have a peer review process. There are certain things that are just like editorial pieces and things like that that are just an editor commissions someone to write something, and maybe the editor themselves reviews it, but it's not taken external of the journal. So I think there's any different level or means to get something published that way.
Yeah.
Right. Well, how's everyone's project going?
Sorry, Kelly, if you're watching this. It's going good. It's going good. I'm in the near end of it, so but it's just the whole process. I'm like doing it is, and I keep having that thought in my head, like, this is just for this class, like this is even like a real deal thing. So I'm just like, oh my gosh, just the thought of it intimidates me more than anything. But it's a lot.
Yeah. I had a minor technological issue yesterday, so I finished all the presentation part that we're supposed to post today.
Yeah.
And I just so I have some video and then some narrated PowerPoint slides. And I've never used a Mac before, which I just got a new laptop. And the way that PowerPoint works for Macs is not what I'm used to for PC.
Oh, no.
So you can't save a PowerPoint presentation as a video on Mac like you can in PC. So I can't. Anyway, so I'm at work now, and I just had to get IT to bring me a new microphone that I have to re-record on my work computer at lunch today.
Yeah.
The video, so I can get this posted by tonight. But otherwise, it's going well.
Yeah, I'm doing mine. As soon as we're done, I'm recording my stuff so I can go and post it.
So.
I
can see why you something you're interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because if I wasn't interested in it, and I was looking through all of the data and all that, I'd be like, no, can't go through anymore. Like if I did a full study.
Mm-hmm.
3 people is not bad, but a full study of reading notes, and if I wasn't interested, it would be challenging.
Yeah. Well, and then not to be that guy that talks about ethics, but, the more interested you are in a topic, the harder it might be to be unbiased, right?
Right.
If you're really interested in it, you're going to have strong opinions about what's happening. So that's always interesting, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, my clock says 11:29.
Yeah, we have standard 30 minutes.
30 minutes, right? Well, we're done. Yeah. Kaylee, just in case you're still watching, we're done with the discussion.
I can go ahead and stop recording.
So